Hi, I'm Nell Haynes. I'm a cultural and linguistic anthropologist, and today I'm going to talk about what anthropologists call political economy. Political economy is a word that's used differently by various groups. Generally, it's the study of how political institutions and economic systems influence one another. This can be on a large scale, like global political economy, or small scale, looking at the interaction in a certain city, town, or even neighborhood, one like El Barrio, which Philippe Bourgeois talks about. Increasingly, though, anthropologists are interested in the ways the large scale and small scale interact. So even if they're studying the ways people sell secondhand items to those in their same small town, they also need to understand how that relates to national or global economics. Things like the unemployment rate, widespread attitudes about capitalism versus socialism, or the ways items are advertised might impact this very local exchange system. Anthropologists think of economic ideologies as something that has to be explained on a cultural level. This means anthropologists are interested in the assumptions behind how people think about economics and how they behave according to that thinking. So an anthropologist isn't necessarily interested in something like game theory and theorizing how an individual can maximize their position. Instead, they'd be interested in why a person thinks their goal is cooperative or individual, or how they might see it connected to other aspects of their life. As you know, anthropologists study a wide variety of things, and when studying economics, they take a holistic view. They see economics contextualized by other aspects of the culture they're interested in. Things like religion, race, gender and sexuality, social expectations and norms, language, and people's understanding of their environment. In thinking about political economy, anthropologists use the work of Karl Marx, primarily his book Capital. In this book, Marx explains how, within capitalist systems, money is made. He explains there are some people who start off with a bit of extra money, called surplus, which is left over after fulfilling their needs. With that money, they can make more money. They can buy raw materials and also pay people to make those materials into a finished product that they can sell for more than the sum of what they paid for the materials plus what they paid people for their labor in making the finished product. So they make more surplus, which they can put back into this system. This money is capital, a term you've probably heard quite a bit. Marx was writing in the 1860s, when factories were the major industry in Western Europe and the United States. He uses the example of a coat factory. The owner buys linen and pays laborers to make that fabric into coats. The owner then sells the coats, making more money. The workers are paid for their labor, but generally just enough so they can get by. They aren't going to get rich just by making coats for someone else. Marx was describing this process, but also had a revolutionary goal in mind, to point out to people that those who own the means of production, the things like linen and sewing machines in this example, they make more capital, while those who are selling their labor don't benefit much. He hoped his writing would raise consciousness among the proletariat to demand their rights. The labor that these workers put into raw materials turns them into commodities, or something bought and sold, exchanged in a market. A commodity has value. In fact, it has two kinds of value. The first is exchange value. That's essentially how much an item can be sold for, which is a factor of the cost of raw materials and the amount that was paid for the labor that goes into it. The use value is something different. It describes the uses to which the object can be put or the human needs it fulfills. One example of these different kinds of values is land, especially in big cities. If there's an empty lot of green space in the middle of a mixed income neighborhood, its use value to the local residents might revolve around creating a community garden or having a place where children can play soccer games. A real estate developer, though, would be interested in its exchange value instead. They might think about how much money they could make by buying at a low cost, putting up a fancy condominium, and selling those for a big profit. Probably residents in the neighborhood would see this in different ways too. People who own homes nearby might think this will increase the exchange value of their own homes and be in support, while others might think it would be harder to find parking or be sad about losing space for the community garden. Those who rent their homes might also worry that it can increase rent prices and they wouldn't be able to afford to live in the neighborhood anymore. So the money the developer would be able to make through building condos is one way of thinking about value of the land, but the ways other people could use that land is another way to think about value. We can also go back to the example of coats to understand this, though maybe a more updated example of coats. The use value of a Canada Goose coat versus the discount coat your grandmother bought you at her favorite bargain store are very similar. They will both keep you reasonably warm in the winter, but their exchange values are very different. The materials and machines used to make the Canada Goose coat might be slightly more expensive, but the branding and status of one coat over the other means that people would be willing to pay far more for roughly the same value. So some things to discuss are, what are examples of other products which have a very similar use value, but different exchange value? And how do these products reflect or contribute to social status? This idea of status is related to the work of a French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu. He had read Marx and agreed with a lot of what he said about capital, and particularly was interested in the relationship between capital and socioeconomic class. For Marx, there were the elite who owned the means of production and were able to generate more capital with it. And there were the proletariat who sold the labor to their owners, to these owners, the factory owners, meaning they were paid to do work to keep this generation of capital going. But Bourdieu realized that there was much more to categorizing class than just where someone fit into this system and how much money they had. He recognized there was a factor that really took into consideration social issues. One class was often correlated with money, but it wasn't the sole factor. For example, in both the Kula Ring and the Potlatch, which you read about, having economic resources allowed Trobriand Islanders and Pacific Northwest Native folks to increase their status within their social groups through trading and gift giving. This status could then be leveraged to gain more political power. So some things to discuss here are there any examples from the mainstream United States where gift giving contributes to status in similar ways? Also, how are use value and exchange value captured in these settings? In thinking about France, Bourdieu recognized that because people in different socioeconomic classes acted differently, dressed differently, spent their money on different things, spoke and even moved their bodies differently, he wanted to get at the class aspects of these things. And often these less concrete ways of drawing distinctions between different groups were what made them endure generation to generation. In a book called Distinction, Bourdieu used the terms social capital and cultural capital to describe the ways people solidified the differences between their own group and others. He used social capital to describe the ways people could use their social networks as a resource that might be even more important than money. For example, a recent college graduate usually doesn't have much money on their own. They don't own property, they don't have a lot of money in the stock market, and haven't accumulated much wealth through working yet. But maybe a professor can help them get an internship at a company they want to work for eventually. Or perhaps they discover the person doing the hiring at their favorite NGO also went to their college, and they can use that commonality to try to get hired. Those kinds of social connections might help them get the job and eventually earn economic capital. Another type of symbolic capital that Bourdieu describes is cultural capital. This has to do with what a person knows or knows how to do, which can also help them access certain resources. Having a college degree is a huge piece of cultural capital, but it also varies given the circumstance and the discipline of the degree. Trying to get a job in a biology lab, a degree in the humanities might not help much. Other kinds of knowledge, like being able to play an instrument or having read the latest, most talked about book on the New York Times bestseller list, can be forms of cultural capital. Even just knowing how to talk about things like art, opera, or ballet can make one appear to fit into a certain context. Because things like art, opera, and even college are expensive to buy or attend, knowing about them gives one the appearance that they're part of the world of economic capital. And sometimes these three types of capital, economic, cultural, and social, are hard to distinguish from one another. That's because they often reinforce each other. So parents who are very wealthy can afford to pay for things like private school tuition, tutors, music lessons, and they might be alums of a prestigious college and can help their children be admitted as legacy students. The child then earns a degree from this prestigious school while also making friends with other people who will have the same prestigious degree. That degree might be the difference between getting on the fast track to their dream job or having to start low down on the company ladder. Because they've been exposed to music, art, and other kinds of knowledge that are considered prestigious, they fit in with those around them and are able to move up the ranks of the company, making more and more money. So while they're probably working hard at their job, their success is in part due to the economic capital their parents invested in their education, the social connections that might help them get the job or promotion, and the cultural capital that helps them fit in with their peers while moving up the company ladder. By contrast, a smart student who doesn't have wealthy parents may graduate from high school with good grades, but not know exactly how to maneuver to move from working class to middle class. Perhaps they go to community college and excel again, but haven't accumulated the kinds of social and cultural capital as the student at the prestigious college. They might get a degree and find stable work, but they might not fit into these quote unquote high class spaces and groups in the same way. That might be the difference in promotion, or even the comfort they feel in these kinds of aspirations. Because these different kinds of capital tend to reinforce each other and reproduce class differences, it's hard to think of them as entirely separate. But we can see differences sometimes in the ways people in different professions are positioned. So for example, a college professor has lots of cultural capital. She might be called upon as an expert, be interviewed by news media, and certainly her students think of her as having a lot of knowledge. But compared to the elite in the United States, professors don't have much economic capital. I promise they are not members of the 1%. On the other hand, there are plenty of people with lots of money and good social connections, but aren't considered sophisticated. A local politician, like a professor, might not have a lot of economic capital, but through campaigning can really increase their social capital and get elected because they're able to speak to their constituents about issues that really matter to them. So if we think about major contenders in the Democratic primaries, some have more of certain kinds of capital than others. Some that might be easy to identify are Bloomberg with his large economic capital, Biden, whose ties to Obama increase his social capital, Warren, whose focus on policy and her education were important to her popularity, and Bernie, whose cultural capital is important, but even the fact that we usually call him Bernie suggests it's his charisma and ability to connect with people that made him a leading candidate at some times. Cultural capital, like education, policy, and speaking ability, matter to all. Ability to finance their campaign matters to all. And obviously, appeal to voters is important to all. But we see different combinations and approaches to each of these kinds of capital among the contenders. At this point, it looks as if social capital has been the most important in this particular race. So now think about the different kinds of capital you have. What are the most important in your everyday life in college right now? What are most important when you go home for a break? And what will be most important when you graduate? Okay, so we've talked a lot about the ways economic, social, and cultural capital reinforce one another among people who want to get good jobs, appear educated to their interlocutors, and gain more institutional social power. But these are all concepts that are useful in thinking about how people appeal to their social groups, even if those social groups are not elite. In Philippe Bourgeois' article, people in El Barrio could make economic capital in a number of ways. Getting a formal job might be the most accepted outside of the neighborhood, but among their neighbors, the respect earned from selling drugs was more conducive to social status. So we could say that the drugs have an exchange value, but the act of selling them also has a use value in contributing to respect and status. Another example might be If you're from a small working class town or neighborhood, you might try to fit in by trying not to sound too educated or too wealthy. Playing down this kind of capital can help you gain social capital in those situations. So when you run into neighbors at the local diner and they ask what you've been reading, what shows you've been watching, or strike up a conversation about music, you might choose to talk about the girl with the dragon tattoo instead of telling them you're reading Pierre Bourdieu. Or you might talk about Taylor Swift instead of bringing up the operas you're learning about in a history of music class. In this case, downplaying cultural capital can serve to increase social capital. It all depends on the situation, but having the knowledge of social norms in different situations allows people to use their resources in the best possible way. And usually we do this without even thinking about it. So something to discuss is, are there other situations or examples you can think of where downplaying education or wealth is better for someone's social capital? High school popularity can also be a good example of this. A student whose family has a lot of money and can invite friends over to swim in their family pool might go a long way in popularity, but other factors like being able to play a sport really well may increase a student's social status too. In some cases, being really good at academics increases status. In others, it decreases it. It may do both simultaneously among different groups of friends. There are countless movies about high school where combinations of economic, cultural, and social capital contribute to popularity or lack thereof. But my favorite is Clueless. So as you watch this clip, think about the different characters and what kinds of capital they have. Especially think about how they demonstrate that capital in their high school world.
There you go, there you go. Share! Birthday share! Come in, share! Stoger, I would just like to say that physical education in this school is a disgrace. I mean, standing in line for 40 minutes is hardly aerobically effective. I doubt I've worked off the calories in a stick of carefree gum. Well, you certainly exercise your mouth, Cher. Now hit the ball. Ms. Stoger, that machine is just lost at waiting to happen. Thanks for the legal advice. Dion, you're up. Oh no, Miss Stoger, I have a note from my tennis instructor and he would prefer it if I didn't expose myself to any training that might derail his teachings. Fine. Amber? Miss Stoger, my plastic surgeon doesn't want me doing any activity where balls fly at my nose. Well, there goes your social life.
Stoger, got another one. Ladies, we have a new student with us. This is Ty Frazier.
You don't have time to change, but you could hit a few balls in those clothes. She could be a farmer in those clothes. See, my mission is clear. Would you look at that girl? She is so adorably clueless. We've got to adopt her. She is toe up. Our stock would plummet. Dee, don't you want to use your popularity for a good cause? No. Come here. Yeah, come here. Hang with us. Oh, thank you. So we decided to show Ty the ropes at Bronson Alcott High School. That is the Lana's group over there. They do the TV station. They think that's the most important thing on earth. And that's the Persian Mafia. You can't hang with them unless you own a BMW. And there's Elton in the white vest. All the most popular boys in the school. Including my boyfriend, ain't he cute? Yeah. If you make the decision to date a high school boy, they are the only acceptable ones. Cher, which one of them's your boyfriend? As if. Cher's got attitude about high school boys. It's a personal choice every woman has got to make for herself. Sorry, I have asked repeatedly not to call me woman.
Excuse me, Miss Dion.
Thank you.
Okay, but street slang is an increasingly valid form of expression. Most of the feminine pronouns do have mocking, but not necessarily misogynistic undertone.
Wow. You guys talk like grown-ups. Oh, well, this is a really good school. I'm gonna go get a soda. You guys want? Sure. Let's do a makeover. No. No. Oh, come on, let us. Cher's main thrill in life is a makeover, okay? It gives her a sense of control in a world full of chaos. Please. Sure. Why not? I don't care what my teachers say. I'm gonna be a supermodel. Everyone is gonna dress like me. Wait and see when I'm a supermodel. And my hair will shine like the sea. And everyone will wanna look just like me. I'm gonna be a supermodel. Now squeeze your buttocks when you come up. Squeeze. Yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. And my buttons, they don't feel nothing like steel. Okay, it will get easier, I promise. Just as long as we do it every day, not just sporadically. How do you know if we're doing it sporadically? That's another thing, Ty. We've got to work on your accent and vocabulary. See, sporadic means once in a while. Try and use it in a sentence today. All right. From now on, we're alternating Cindy Crawford's Aerobicize and Buns of Steel and reading one non-school book a week. My first book is Fit or Fat. Mine is Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Good. That takes care of our minds and bodies, but we should do something good for mankind or the planet for a couple of hours.
Hey, Brainiac.
Ugh, the dreaded X. Ty, this is Josh.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, you know about this stuff. I want to do something good for humanity.
How about sterilization?
What do you think?
I'm amazed.
That I'm devoting myself so generously to someone else?
No. That you found someone even more clueless than you are to worship you.
I'm rescuing her from teenage hell. Do you know the wounds of adolescence can take years to heal?
Yeah, and you've never had a mother, so you're acting out on that poor girl like she was your Barbie doll.
Freshman psych rears its ugly head.
Hey, I am not taking psych.
Never. I'm going to take that lost soul in there and make her well-dressed and popular. Her life will be better because of me. How many girls can say that about you? Mentos better, Mentos fresher. Fresh goes better with Mentos fresh and full of life.
Mentos, the fresh maker. Be seeing you.
Yeah, I hope not sporadically.
Okay, so in this clip, we can think about what forms of economic capital do we see? What forms of social capital are portrayed? What forms of cultural capital do we see? And how do all of these reinforce one another? Thinking specifically about Cher's attempts to turn Ty into someone who fits into her social group, she changes the way Ty looks, her hair and clothing. She hopes she'll use more educated language. They work out in order to have more fit bodies. She instructs Ty as to who are the acceptable groups of people to be associated with, and probably other things that you could point out too. Okay, so to review all of this, we talked about first, political economy. This means anthropologists are interested in the assumptions behind how people think about economics and how they behave according to that thinking. Some things to continue thinking about are what are the assumptions behind the Kula ring that make this exchange system seem natural? What are the assumptions behind the potlatch that make this gift giving seem natural? Second, Karl Marx points out a contrast between use value and exchange value. So remember, what do those different kinds of value mean? What's the difference between them? And can you give an example of use value and exchange value of an item you own? Third, Pierre Bourdieu points out that not all capital is economic. How does he define cultural capital? How does he define social capital? How are cultural, social, and economic capital interrelated? And can you give an example of how the three reinforce one another? Okay, so hopefully you learned a lot about how anthropologists understand economic systems beyond just talking about the exchange of money. Again, remember, anthropologists try to take a holistic view, so economics is related to religion, race, gender and sexuality, social expectations and norms, language, and people's understandings of their environment. So next time you buy something or give a gift, think about how that fits into each of these aspects of your own social life.